What's up, Summoners? King Blair here. Today, we're going to be talking about the current banner heroes, Pavel as well as Kayron, and whether or not you should pull for them. So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Link down in the description. We are going to be doing showcases on Kayron later this Monday, and we may be trying Pavel in one of the streams, so make sure you subscribe to get a notification for that. We're also super close to 4K, so let's try to get there, and I will be starting to work on that Mortal X, trying to get it to you guys as soon as possible. But without further ado, let's get to the video. So as always, I like to start the video talking about the current state of the bookmarks, right? Because that does play a major role when you're pulling for these heroes, because these heroes are not limited. And while they may be good, you may want to reconsider where you stand. So we just came off of a limited banner, which means the majority of players will not have the bookmarks to pity. It is never a good idea to try to go into a banner when you aren't prepared to pity, because you never know when you're going to have to pity for a unit. So if you don't have enough to pity, you may just end up wasting bookmarks and getting upset that you didn't get the unit that you wanted. So if you're someone that has like no resources or no covenants, just save. I know it sucks. I know Kayron's really cool, but just save. Some other things you guys do need to know is that next week we are highly likely to get an announcement on a new hero that should be coming out in about 2 weeks, which should be Senya or another hero. We never know with Smilegate, but next week they should be making an announcement on that new unit, as well as the collab. It's just right around the corner, most likely coming in April, which is something they said in the past. So make sure you are ready for that collab, because there probably will be multiple limited heroes again that you'll need to be ready to pity for in case things go terribly wrong, which means that you have to have a lot of bookmarks ready in case that does happen. So again, there's a lot coming in the future. Both these units are really cool and do perform well in their own scenarios, but it's important that you also take a look at your account and realize that, hey, is it really worth me pulling for this? They get it with that all the way, knowing there's a limit coming up, knowing there's a new unit, and knowing you probably don't have that many resources, should you pull? As far as Pavel and K-ron, Pavel is a really cool unit. It's a very cool cleave unit, and he does have some setup. He doesn't really have too much of a PvE presence. He can kind of work for Banshee, although not super great, but he can work there. But primarily he's going to be a PvP cleave unit. He only really functions in a cleave team, and I think the new EE does make him spicy for cleaves, although it's not a must-have. It's just a good option. So it's not the end of the world if you're not able to pull him, but if you can, he's a pretty good option for cleaves. As far as Kayron, this is a unit that I have a lot of experience on. If you go on my channel, I've done full guides on this guy. I've talked about him several times. I've done millions of videos on him, and I love Kayron, and he's so good. But as far as PvP, he's starting to fall off slightly, but he's still extremely powerful. So it's kind of like a Lenciel, where he's still extremely powerful unit, and he does his job very, very well. But he just can't just take him everywhere like he used to. He used to be one of the main DPSs in the game. Now he's just kind of like a very good option against cleave teams, and occasionally against landy teams that may not have Cerise or a Tenet. So Kayron, I would say between the two, if you're actually pulling for one, Kayron, you'll actually probably find more uses for him, particularly in anti-cleaving teams that don't have ways to strip your immunity off, as well as having the potential to just solo teams with counter set for aggro teams. And against landy teams in the right team, he can actually pop off quite a lot. As far as PvE, he's also one of the best farmers in the game, because with the immunity set, you can just turn off skills. He'll always do an AoE skill, allowing him to farm quite fast. So he's pretty good for farming. And also, he does okay in the Earth Expedition, which is going to be coming back. So he does have some presence there. All in all, both units are good in their own respect, with Kayron being very powerful at anti-cleaving, and also in the right situations where the opponent doesn't have any form of strip, can really pop off. But Pavel, more of like a really nice addition to your cleave team. Neither is a must-have unit, although Kayron is a little bit on the stronger side. Pavel still to be proven to be strong. But let's look at the skills, right? Starting with the one that got a new EE very recently, which is going to be Pavel. So as far as stats, he actually has some really good stats, right? He does get an EE that gives him an extra 12% crit rate, which allows him to start at 27% crit rate, which is a very good starting crit rate when you include the EE. He also does have one of the fastest base speeds in the game at 124, being faster than units like Cerise, Athletica, and a lot of different setup units, allowing you to be very fast and build him very, very fast, since he does have that crit rate and that speed. He also has very respectable attack, being quite high, but of course that comes with the downside. He really doesn't have that many defensive stats, right? It's gonna come at a cost that he has those high damage stats, those high speed stats, a high crit rate, because it's just not going to have that much of defensive stats. It does awaken him to attack, allowing you to make him even faster and stronger to do more damage in a team. But now, as far as the skills, I'll also be talking about the skills assuming that he has his exclusive equipment. So the S1, nothing crazy, and usually this skill is probably the skill that if you're using this skill, you're kind of in trouble. If Pavel gets to do both his S2 and S3, that should already win you the fight. If you're not able to win the fight of the S2 and S3, you're probably going to be in trouble with your cleave. But the S1, what it does is decrease hit chance. It can come in clutch in certain situations, since glancing hit can allow him to live just a little bit extra longer. Not something you want for a squishy bursty unit, because usually squishy bursty units are in and out, and he doesn't really have that much self-protection. So he's literally just there to pop his S2 and his S3, and hopefully you can win off of that later on. The S1 is just there. It's a nice little debuff, and it does space off his max speed. So nothing crazy as far as the S1. As far as the S2, this is where we start seeing his bread and butter. This skill increases his own attack for 2 turns and fires a strong blast at all enemies. The attack buff is before the damage. This does allow him to start a fight without very little support, right? He can be the first unit to move in the game and set up into a challenger dominial because you're able to do an AoE skill that increases his attack. So he gets the attack naturally for himself before doing the damage. The other thing is with the exclusive equipment, you can also give attack buff to your ally with the highest health. Now, apparently there is a bug with this right now in certain situations where if Pavel is the unit that has the highest attack, he gives the attack buff to himself. But hopefully they're able to fix that, and that's not the way it was intended, so that he can give it to the ally with the highest attack that's not himself. They may or may not do that, and you may have to build your Pavel differently accordingly. But you should be able to give an attack buff to the ally with the highest attack as well as himself. And it's an AoE attack, does pretty good, will most likely crit and set up into a C-Dom. Now, where the combo actually lies is going to be in the soul burn, because when you soul burn the S2, you get the opportunity to get an extra turn. So you're able to set up your own attack buff, do pretty good damage AoE, a really nice poke damage, potentially stripping some FCC barriers, and then you're able to come in with an S3 that ignores damage sharing effects, and the damage increases according to your speed. So you have a unit that is extremely fast, that is able to set up his own attack buff, and then come in with an S3 and one-shot a unit. This is very often used to kill C-sides in Arena and other priority target units since he is so fast. Usually just being able to S2 and S3 is amazing. If you're able to build him really fast due to his high base speed, while still having 85% crit rate, you can actually make him a Cerise killer because he does have higher base speed than Cerise. You'd be able to set up the S2, do some good damage on her, and then finish her off with the S3 before she even takes a turn. Now, while this all sounds very, very powerful, some other things for the EE is this skill can grant skill nullifier, but that's only one more turn. He most likely won't live that much longer before he just gets popped. But with Guiding Light, you can live a little bit longer. And of course, the other one is the cleansing on the S2. Their other build is as a Cleave Pavel, kind of in the back line with Guiding Light, where you can just do a one-shot combo and then you're done, right? Which is not a bad option, since he can be built faster than other enemies such as Bazaar. And if you bring souls, you should be able to come in S2 and S3 with a damage build and be able to take out the units that way. As far as to where you would use him, he's going to be primarily used in cleave teams as a speed cleaver, since he does have that high base speed and his damage does based off speed. He can set up into a C-Dom very easily, give your team attack, cut into the team, and it can be very, very scary for the opponent because they don't know how fast your Pavel is, because his speed is very, very high, which allows you to set up attack buff, do damage, set up into a C-Dom, and potentially kill a priority target unit right off the bat. Very, very strong there. The other one would be more in a slow aggro team, maybe with something like a Rose, and have the team follow up after the Pavel, right? So there's options, but primarily going to be a cleave team. So if you're not a cleaver, definitely shouldn't be pulling for Pavel. It's unlikely you'll use him. As far as overall thoughts on him, he is very reliant on souls, which is one of his biggest weaknesses. If you don't have a mage to be able to soul burn, he's kind of useless, because if you don't have the soul burn, you just essentially get a small AoE attack that's not going to kill. It can still set up into a C-Dom, but you ideally want the souls, right? So that part is really, really nice. So that's one reliance he does have. This S3 actually does very good damage. The S2 is not as high of damage as you may like, but it does pretty good damage, right? It's not going to one-shot an RB, right? So don't expect this to kill an RB, but this can kill C-sides extremely easily since it ignores Arias. But that's as far as Pavel goes. So should you pull for him? If you're a cleaver, he's definitely a good option for you, and actually quite strong if you set up the right speed cleave. But if you're not a cleaver, there's almost no reason for you to pull him. I'm not a cleaver. I have a Pavel. He's 6-star, has a ton of Malagora. I don't see myself using him even with the EE because I don't have a team for him to fit in, right? So just know that if you're not a cleaver, you're not going to get to use your Pavel that often, and probably not an option you want to go with if you're not a cleaver. But if you're a cleaver, it's a good option. Again, it's not the end of the world you don't get him. He's not essential to your team. He's just a nice addition. So overall, I would tell you to skip right now and wait at least to see the next character that's being released, and potentially for the collab, especially if you're drained on resources. You're not missing out insanely, but if you do want him, he's definitely a good option for you if you have extra resources or if you're just a collector and want to get him. Now, Kayron. Oh man, if you just type King Blair, I've done so much stuff with Kayron. I've done full guide on him. It's a little bit outdated, so hopefully we'll be able to change that up and talk a little bit more about Kayron. Also, I know this is kind of late, but I will be showing the builds for both Kayron and Pavel right at the end of the video. But yeah, overall, Kayron. He went from release to being really good, to being mediocre, to being extremely good, to being meta, and now back to being just a really strong option. He is still a very, very strong unit. It's hard for me to say whether or not to pull because I use him a lot, and he definitely has carried me in the early game in particular, and I still use him to this day in late game in a lot of situations, right? So definitely can work and has a wide variety of builds, but with the current state of things, with Senya being right around the corner and potentially being a really good unit, with everyone just being drained, and with the current meta having so much water, it's not particularly Kayron's best season, but that doesn't mean he can't just come back and stomp later on. He's still an amazing unit, and I would say if you have the resources, if you have extra resources, you'll be ready for the collab, and you're not worried about Senya, he's a really, really good proven option that you will definitely be using in the future because he does have a lot of potential. And we'll cover some of the things, and I'll show my Kayron as well that I use in arena defense, and I'm able to get pretty much legend in arena by using Kayron in my arena defense. So a pretty good arena defense unit. As far as stats, his attack is not one of the highest when compared to other Ds. He has atrocious defensive stats. The HP is not even that high, but he does have the highest base speed in the game. He does have the highest base speed in the game, unlocking a speed build that is really, really cool, especially with his exclusive equipment that does also give him crit rate. And that is right, you heard that right. He gets an exclusive equipment that gives him crit rate. This does bump up his crit rate all the way up to 35%, which is just ridiculous. That's just insane to me that he can reach such high levels of crit rate, and allows him to try a wide variety of builds. And of course, his awakening is going to be attack percentage, allowing him to do more damage and supplement a little bit of a low attack stat overall. Not the craziest attack stat, right? But again, pretty solid kit overall. This guy is probably my favorite design unit to this day. Every time I use Kayron, I get really excited because I just love him. I love how he looks. The sword looks sick. Oh man, I'm a Kayron fanboy. I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I'm a Kayron fanboy. I saw the bunny Kayron skin and I wanted it, but you know we can't have everything in the game. But alright, as far as his skills, it's very in depth. But basically S1 has a 50% chance to land glancing hit. Nothing crazy, but it can definitely help you out to survive a little bit longer and keep your passive up a little bit longer. As we'll see later, this skill doesn't look like much right now because it looks like a single target damage skill, but this S1 becomes something of nightmares. One of his exclusive equipment increases the damage that this skill does by 15%, allowing it to do quite a lot of damage, right? But right now, it doesn't look like a lot, right? But then we'll get to the passive. The passive, essentially, when he receives lethal damage, he gains immortality, which essentially means that he's not going to die no matter how much damage he takes. This can be blocked by things like unable to be buffed, and it can be stripped though. So things like Cerise can strip this buff. Things like F10A can stop him from getting this buff. Cerise can, with the S2, stop him from getting this buff. CSAC can stop him from getting this buff. T-Cern can stop him from getting this buff. One thing to note though is with units like CSAT and T-Cern, if they do too much damage and actually proc immortality before they apply the debuff, then he'll get the debuff before they apply the debuff. He'll get the buff before they apply the debuff. Sorry, I know that's a mouthful. But essentially, what this allows him to do is it resets his S3 when he reaches lethal damage, which allows him to use the S3. That's we'll see is pretty nice. The other thing is that it makes his S1 an AoE skill. That is amazing. Because it makes his S1, when you have a buff, be an AoE skill. Doesn't count for dual attacks, but every time he takes a turn, you can soul burn it for extra damage and do really good AoE damage. Like, we're talking really freaking good AoE damage, and the only condition is that you have a buff, which is very easy to do. And you need to have him on immunity set, and so he'll always have a buff for turn 1, and his S3 can also give him a buff. So again, very, very nice. Void Slash being AoE, it's such a sick skill. We'll see it in a second. But now onto the S3. Very cookie cutter, but makes a lot of sense when you actually look at it. Single target damage skill. The EE either gives it a silence, which I think is probably the worst one for him unless you're using a speed Kayron to disrupt, or the other one is going to be that it increases the damage by 15%. Single target damage that does damage based on his missing health. So since this resets when he receives lethal damage, you can do a ton of damage with this skill, right? Especially when paired with something like Elias Knife. It does a lot of single target damage, right? And increases his attack, allowing him to A, get a buff, B, get an attack buff, right? So what you essentially would do in an ideal scenario, they don't proc your mortality early enough, you do an S3 or you give him an attack buff. He does very high single target damage, sets up his own attack buff. They push him down all the way down to the mortality. This S3 will reset. You'll be able to do it again. If you kill, this skill will also do more damage because you're going to be at 1 HP. If you kill, you extend your immortality for 1 turn. You extend all your buffs for 1 more turn, which allows you to go into an S1 and then just be able to come in for a nice little sweep. That's a typical Kayron combo, and it's Cleave's worst nightmare. If they're not able to strip or lock down the Kayron, they are going to lose to the S3 extending the immortality, and then the S1 just absolutely destroying their whole team because it does so much damage, and it also does damage based on his missing health. So he can do a ton of AoE damage, right? So he's a very high single target damage threat with the S3. Very good AoE damage threat, especially for units like Landy that may be hiding behind a guiding light. You'll be able to reach them with S1, do a ton of damage to them, potentially kill them, and Landy can't strip you, so you'll be able to just S3 another target and then just kill her off with a little bit of a soul burn AoE attack, right? Doing tons of damage. So that's as far as the kit goes. How would you use him? He's really good in arena defense right now. I use him in arena defense. I'll show it in a second. And it gets me more wins than it should. And it has let me be higher than I should be. Right? So very good for arena defense and Guild Wars defense to an extent. Really good for RTA against Cleave teams. And one of the builds is actually going to be the counter build, which I didn't discuss in the full guide. The counter build right now is one of the more popular builds. The only problem with that build is it forces him to be an anti-cleave unit because it gives the opponent a lot of turns to deal with his buffs, right? So that's the only problem with the counter build. It's primarily going to be for anti-cleaving and for Guild Wars defense because it is kind of hard to deal with because counter build does do the S1 very often. You give him Dust Devil, and he can also AoE multiple times because if it procs Dust Devil with S1, you actually use the S1 twice, which is pretty crazy. So overall, really good at anti-cleaving, really good in arena defense. Since his skill 1 is always AoE, you can turn off auto for farming. And since he'll have immunity buff, he'll always do the AoE skill, which makes it really nice for farming. I use him for farming all the time. For Golem, he does okay, not the greatest. And then for the Green Expedition, he's actually quite good because he does a lot of AoE damage, which allows him to do significant damage to the Lich. Right, so pretty good for Earth Expedition that's going to be coming back. So overall, should you pull for him? I really love this guy. If you have the resources, I want to say consider pulling for him. He is so good at certain scenarios. You're not going to use him everywhere like you used to because Cerise and F10A are huge counters to him, and Seaside Bellona, all these units. But against the right team, against like a Landy, with Landy being so popular, he's actually starting to see a little bit more play as long as you can take out some of those counters such as Cerise or F10A that can really mess up his day, or pair him up with someone that can actually support him properly. So now as far as builds for both Pavel and Kayron. So again, Kayron overall, really, really good investment, really, really good damage dealer. I love using my Kayron. Even though his gear's not the best, he pops off, dude. And if you don't believe me, I actually triple assessed him. Right? I actually pulled on all his banners until I was able to get him. Like over time, I actually got him to triple assess. I love this unit, and I'm still trying to find better gear for him. It's just a little bit hard to gear him to where like how I want it. But this is a very easy build to achieve, right? Like we got some free boots. We got almost all purple gear. We have like low roll stuff, and we're still able to do a ton of damage, a ton of work, and pop off, right? For some other builds that I would recommend for Kayron, the counter build, again, very, very popular. Won't have almost any speed, but you don't want it to have speed. It's very, very scary when a counter Kayron can pop off and kill a unit. Again, Dust Devil, so he can proc the S1 multiple times. And, of course, the one that does more damage on the S1. There's also, of course, a speed Kayron build. This is the Kayron build that I want to have on my Kayron, essentially, just a more evolved build of my Kayron. As you guys can see, more damage. A little bit faster, so you can actually take a little bit more turns. And then, of course, there's also the Speed Kayron. Very, very versatile unit. Alexa's Basket, Speed. This one doesn't need immunity as much because you don't really need immunity when you're taking turn 1. But it is always nice to have the turn 1. This one you can also use the Silence to interrupt units and kind of mess up people's days, right? So very, very cool. Very, very nice units. Very, very amounts of builds. I believe there is also a Pavel build in case you are curious about Pavel. So if you are curious about Pavel, this is a damage Pavel. It's not a cleave Pavel. This is a Pavel that you're trying to do damage with. You're trying to kill the opponent. You're trying to do work. And then, of course, you also have the little bit of a faster Pavel, probably setting up, again, damage, speed, all that good stuff, right? So that's some builds for them. But that is all I have for you guys today. I'm not going to be doing summons on either because I have both. I can't even summon on Kayron even if I wanted to because I already have everything that I need. But just for good luck, you shouldn't do this, but I'm just going to YOLO it because I'm feeling it today. We're going to do one last time while we close out the video. So that is all I have for you guys today. I hope to see y'all next time. Peace.